Welcome to the Word in Black Reporters Roundtable on Education. I'm Sonny Giles, publisher and CEO of the Houston Defender Network, and a member of the 10 publishers of Black-owned media companies that have established a groundbreaking collaboration called Word in Black. Word in Black was created originally to confront inequities, elevate solutions, and amplify the Black experience in reporting, collecting, and sharing stories about real people in our communities across this country. We believe that by joining forces and providing a platform and examining these experiences in one place, we're able to actually shape how the nation understands and addresses systematic issues of race, justice, and equity. It is through collective understanding that we bring about collective impact. These words are, in this case, the Word in Black publishers, are community leaders who are not newbies to the fight for justice and equity. They've been on the battlefield for 50, 60, 90, more than 100 years, and they've been scratching out the victories and analyzing the defeats. You're invited to join more and learn more, that is, about Word in Black by going to our website, wordinblack.com. and sign up for our newsletter. And while you're there, you can become a founding member by simply pushing the donate button and supporting Word in Black. Now that I've given you a little insight about who and what Word in Black is all about, let's get down to the subject of education. 18 months ago, our world turned upside down because of coronavirus, and the education of our children was hijacked. The reality is many of us are focused on masks and keeping social distance. We're also looking at the learning losses that we derived from simply having no internet or having virtual learning be at a distance. All of this piled on top of the mental health impact, not only on us, but on our children especially. Those are just some of the topics we're going to talk about today. And as a result, we're going to talk with an impressive and some exceptional journalists who have been on the front lines of telling the stories of those who are often overlooked or sometimes ignored. They cover more than just the hot national topics. They are in our neighborhoods. They are on the street. They're delivering the Word in Black. Making this program possible is the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, who has partnered with Word in Black as we foster solutions to racial inequities in America. And we believe that it all starts at K through 12 education. Joining me as co-host of the program is the Chief Content and Collaboration Officer for Local Media Association, Andrew Ramsamy.
Thank you, Sonny, so much for that warm introduction. And thank you to all of you joining us today for this Word in Black Virtual Education Reporters Roundtable. For the past several months, many of the reporters who are on this call today, as well as others, have been reporting on the challenges, issues, and opportunities that COVID-19 has presented itself in relationship to K through 12 education. So joining me are 5 of our reporters from our publishers who are involved in Word in Black. First, Alexis Taylor from the Afro. Alexis, how are you?
I'm well, thank you, Andrew. How are you?
Good, thanks for joining us. Sophie Hurwitz from the St. Louis American. Aaron Allen from the Seattle Medium.
I appreciate the honor. Thank you.
Stefan Johnson from the New York Amsterdam News.
Hello, everyone.
And Sam P.K. Collins from the Washington Informer. Thank you all for joining us today. So I think we were all fully aware that there were challenges and issues facing education and in all the communities that you all deal with locally. Could you give us a sense of what the space of education was like even before the pandemic began? And Alexis, I'll toss it to you. What was the state of education like there in the kind of greater Virginia, DC area?
Sure. So before the pandemic, I was actually in the classroom. I was teaching art to pre-K through 5th grade students. I did that for 3 years, and then I also taught kindergarten for 3 years. So I can say that the state of education prior to the pandemic there were a lot of issues. There were a lot of things that were happening well. I think in Baltimore, there were a lot of initiatives going that were supporting students, helping them meet their learning goals. But there were also some issues that could not be overlooked. At the time that we closed down in March 2020, I was doing a split schedule. So that meant that I was a full-time employee, but I was at 2 different schools during the week, and neither school had a full-time janitorial staff. I remember in March and in February of 2020 going to the office and saying, hey, there's no soap in the bathrooms for the adults. There hasn't been soap in the bathrooms for kids for weeks. I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but that's a health risk. I was at a school in March 2020 that didn't have air. That school still, when they opened this past week, did not have air conditioning. They had to close. They had to send kids home on the first day of school. So some of these issues that were already happening prior to the pandemic, unfortunately, some of them have carried on, even though we are 18 months down the road. But prior to the pandemic, I would say that there were some issues, and because of the pandemic, those issues were exacerbated.
And Sophie, what were the conditions like there in St. Louis on the ground before the pandemic?
Well, like Alexis said, there have definitely been pre-existing issues, primarily of inequity in the area that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. St. Louis City and County have in total, I believe, 24 different school districts and networks of charter schools, and then private schools on top of that. So education is this big, messy issue here, and it's hard to make any type of generalized statement about it. And much like what Alexis said, there were some things that were going really well, some exciting new initiatives in different districts. And then there were some things that were not going as brilliantly. One big issue is that St. Louis Public School District, the district that serves the city, has been consistently losing students, and that was happening prior to the pandemic as well. We've also had to continue facing these issues of neighborhood school closings and of districts trying to figure out how to make not enough money go farther.
And Aaron, the city of Seattle is one of the first areas pretty hit hard by the pandemic. What was life like there prior to all of that happening?
Seattle, when I think of Seattle, I don't think the students were having issues as much as the public school system leadership. We've been going through a lot of changes in the leadership roles in the Seattle Public School District. In regards to that, he's a interim superintendent. There were quite a bit of leadership struggles in regards to bringing in more African-American, particularly male examples within the leadership of the Seattle Public School District. Now we have a Black man who is the interim superintendent of Seattle Public Schools. But in regards to the health and welfare of the school system, its children, there wasn't too much in Seattle to report on. It seems as though it was kind of running pretty smoothly until the pandemic hit.
And Stefan, I'm a proud product of the New York City Board of Education, the largest school district in the country. I'm sure there were no challenges and issues there in New York prior to the pandemic.
Like several people have said, the main issue was inequities and how inequities were exacerbated through the pandemic. Before this, some of the main issues included Mayor Bill de Blasio pushing for universal after-school programs. He had the victory of universal pre-K, so he wanted this other program to address underserved communities and kids who might not have anywhere to go between 3 and 6 p.m. There was an issue with the Department of Education when it came to sports, actually, and inequities in sports. And they wanted to access the records, make them public, of what sports were available to schools that were predominantly white versus schools that were predominantly Black and Latino. So there was another inequity there. And all of this, once COVID hit, it just became worse, just the concept of access. So you have remote learning, but how many people have computers? They want to provide laptops, but how is that? How are they going to deliver those laptops? There were all sorts of issues on that front. So like everyone else said, inequities were exacerbated by the pandemic.
So just to the south of New York is Washington, DC, and Sam with the Washington Informer. Sam, what was the state of education like there on the ground before the pandemic?
Very great question. Before the pandemic, there was a lot of discussion around educational inequity, and DC is a very special place in the sense that, as I'm sure is the case for other jurisdictions, a lot of what's happening in the streets and in the homes often pours into the schools. But from what I've been, talking with some of my sources about is that oftentimes teachers and schools in lower income communities often catch the flack for what's going on in lower income communities. So when students come in and they're suffering from homelessness, they're suffering from mental health issues, things that manifest in low grades and low educational attainment, charter schools get shut down in those communities, teachers get low evaluation scores, and they're often pushed out. So before the pandemic, there was often a lot of discussion around how to improve education, but there wasn't enough discussion about what caused educational inequity. What were the issues that were underlying, that were causing students east of the Anacostia River and other low-income communities in DC to suffer educationally.
So then the pandemic hits, right? It's March of 2020. Students are sent home. I was one of those parents who was dealing with a child who was sent home, days after the nation effectively shut down. Alexis, you talked about being a former public school teacher. You left in mid-April of last year. Talk about, what was the net impact of the pandemic? Did it make things better or did it make things worse?
So I left in April of this year, so I'm only a few months out. But
sorry, I meant to say this year. My apologies.
So I would just say that, at the end of the day, my heart goes out to the kids who are in these classrooms, the teachers who are in these classrooms, the families who were impacted by this pandemic. I would say that the pandemic took some of those issues like overcrowded classrooms, unsanitary classrooms, students not having enough food, students not having enough shelter, adequate shelter. It took those issues and highlighted them and put them on a national stage. Every school district doesn't have the number of students who are homeless. So here in Baltimore City, homeless doesn't always mean that you're on the street. Homeless can mean that you're bouncing from couch to couch each night. Homeless could mean that sometimes you're sleeping with a cousin at their house, and then other times you're with a family friend. So it's not stable housing. When the pandemic hit, all of those issues, again, were exacerbated. Overcrowded classrooms, unsanitary classrooms, those were petri dishes prior to the pandemic. Once the pandemic hit, those classrooms turned into death traps. And I know that kind of seems like, she's saying it's a death trap. That's, kind of overboard, but no, really, you have teachers who are passing away. There are families right now who are planning burial arrangements for teachers in these unsanitary, overcrowded classrooms that we're still seeing right now. So I would say that anytime that you have a school district that is actively communicating with the public saying, hey, we know we're in a pandemic, but we really need to push getting back into the classrooms in person, even though it's not safe, because we have too many students who don't have anywhere to go. We have too many students who don't have food. That's a problem. That's something that America really we have to figure that out, because at the end of the day, that's not really even something that should be on the schools. That's, opening up the can of worms of parents having wages where they can pay for things, parents having wages where they can get adequate housing so they don't have to rely on a school building, parents being able to buy food that is nutritious, food that's actually going to support the development of a child. They can't do that if they're not making that at a job, at 2 and 3 part-time jobs. So then all of these issues during the pandemic, I feel like fell in the lap of the school system.
And Sophie, you mentioned as we were preparing for this discussion that St. Louis was experiencing a shortage of bus drivers before the pandemic. I'm sure that the pandemic did not make the situation better for that.
Yes, actually a few days ago or a few weeks ago, there was a story about how the director of one of our local charter schools ended up also picking up shifts as a bus driver. So I think that really speaks to the urgency there. I know that many districts are trying to offer bonuses for new drivers. I think the reason that we're seeing this school bus driver shortage is really similar to the reasons that we're seeing a lot of teachers leave the workforce and a lot of teacher shortages as well. It's that nobody wants to take these jobs right now because they're high risk and they're low pay, especially with all the uncertainty caused by the Delta variant.
And a big topic that has come up as a result of the pandemic, with kids not going to school and having been out for a while, is the state of mental health. Stefan, what have you seen there in New York in the discussion around providing mental health support for students, for teachers, for parents? What's the discussion there on the ground?
Well, there hasn't been a discussion at all, really, at least from the Department of Education. Most of that discussion is among teachers, it's among parents, it's among students. They're working with each other. So, sit aside, take a break, step away from school, what to do if you're not comfortable going to school, what to do when you're simply afraid. You want to be around your classmates again, you want to be around your friends again, but you're still scared of COVID. And then parents who have kids who aren't the age levels to be vaccinated yet, they're scared about sending their kids to school. But there's no remote option, which makes things worse because now these parents have no choice. And that alone is taking a mental toll on people, but you're not hearing much from the Department of Education on what can be done to ease fears on that front.
And Aaron, the Northwest is particularly known for some of the challenges and issues around mental health. It's a place that doesn't get a lot of sunlight. It's a place that got hit by the pandemic kind of early on. What have you been hearing about students, parents, faculty dealing with mental health issues there in the Northwest?
Well, mental health issues is not even just a education issue any longer. Politics in Seattle has taken mental health issues to another level as far as addressing it. The homeless issues going on here in the Pacific Northwest. But when it comes to the public school system, Seattle Public Schools is trying to address it. They've put it on the table. I kind of found when the pandemic hit that society has really taken public education for granted and its role in society. There was a big one when the pandemic first hit, there was a big panic as far as parents was concerned, as far as society was concerned, and what do we do with our children now that they're not going to school? And I kind of found from my reporting and from my research just how important school and education is in regards to the day, in regards to how society functions, from people, parents having to go to work, needing school so that parents can go to work. And that put a toll, that was a toll on the mental issues of families. Parents just, especially working parents, were not just really used to being with their children 24 hours a day. And you can see the stress that arrived from this unprecedented reaction to this virus. And so the school district put it on the table, as far as a priority in offering counseling, therapy to anyone who wanted to get involved in that fashion, as far as dealing with what was going on when the pandemic hit in relations to mental health. But even more importantly, and I think important for the Pacific Northwest, is that we have a mayoral race going on right now. And they're really trying to put an emphasis on mental health issues, just kind of, countywide, statewide, citywide, in relations to just humanity in general, and how we're coping with the coronavirus and what it's done to society as a whole. But the educational system, I want to say both politically as well as the educational system, they're trying to put that on the burner right now, putting it up front as far as what we're dealing with in regards to how the pandemic has affected society.
And Alexis, you wrote an article for Word in Black talking specifically about what coaches have been dealing with the traditional kind of phys ed class that we all know about, going and doing your jumping jacks, but what did you find?
So I did speak with some coaches and some PE teachers who were talking about how they really had to focus on mental health over the last 18 months. They really had to tap into the emotions that their players and their students were feeling. And so because they couldn't physically congregate together for class, they started to focus on emotional health, some mental, some things that they could do to help their emotional health and their mental stability. I will say that Baltimore City Public Schools had prior to the pandemic, they had some good initiatives surrounding mental health. I did write a couple of articles about different initiatives like with yoga. I know as a teacher myself, I had sat through multiple professional developments that were focused on mindfulness and incorporating mindfulness into the classroom. That was back in 2014, 2015. I can remember being in kindergarten and we would start the day off throughout the day, periodically after lunch, and at the end of the day, have mindfulness moments, breathing techniques, things like that. So during the pandemic, I can say not just me, but I saw this across the board with my colleagues. They were incorporating some of those techniques that we had already been learning prior to the pandemic. They just moved those to the virtual realm. And so for me, what I was doing in my classes, I was just going onto YouTube and just there's several different series, but there are series specifically for kids. And I was just doing one video a day, 3 minutes here, 5 minutes there, teaching them how to breathe, teaching them how to clear their mind. And then also there's been this push because you have a lot of kids that are going to be dealing with parents passing away, both parents passing away, grandparents, they themselves might have gotten sick. And so I will commend Baltimore City Schools for what they've done around mental health with mindfulness moments. There's also been a really strong push for trauma-informed care. And I think all of that is going to come into play as we move through this pandemic and try to get back to normal. There's going to be no shortage of traumatic instances going on in these families for the students. And so I think that Baltimore City was already on the right track, and I hope that they continue that trajectory of trauma-informed care.
Stefan?
It seems like we talk about overall what to do with people. We forget to make it personal sometimes, so we have to give examples on about people just to demonstrate how it affects a person. Last fall, I wrote a multi-part story about this one particular mother, 3 kids, different ages. They're all doing remote learning. She had recently gotten divorced. Her father had died of cancer, and she had to bring her grandmother in to live with her because her grandmother lived in an area that had a very high positive COVID rate. So showing that to people and making it personal, I think is very important in demonstrating that, yes, this is a infection, this is a pandemic that affects everyone, but look at how it's affecting this one particular person. And a reader can see that as like, oh, okay, we know exactly what she's going through because I might be going through something similar. It helps to know I'm not alone.
Yeah. Well, and then, I mean, with that, the information that is out there, both good and bad, right? The challenges and issues around inequities, but then in particular, the amount of information that was being spread around the vaccine. And right now, as of this date, the vaccine is available to anyone 12 and older, but anyone 12 and younger does not have access to the vaccine. Curious, Sam, what have you been hearing in terms of either good or bad information being spread in your community around the vaccine, and what has been the receptivity to it?
Well, in terms of the vaccine right now, what I'm seeing is, some apprehension toward those who don't want to get the vaccine. With the numbers going up, there's a lot of attention toward those who are apprehensive about getting it. In Washington, D.C., especially in majority Black communities, children who are of age and their parents are not getting the vaccine, out of concern for what they consider the lack of testing around it, and just the concern that the vaccine might not be enough to protect them against COVID. And even with that, when it comes to what people might consider misinformation, what I see it as is more of a pretty much, or how it has been described to me is more of like a debate and a discussion that's very polarized. You have people who are very concerned about COVID, who've lost family members, who are very fearful about what COVID has done and who want to get back. But you also have people who are cognizant of the medical industrial complex, about how, medicine and doctors, even though, they are intended to help people, haven't been so kind to African Americans and people of color in general. So the discussion around vaccinations have been very polarized, and it has highlighted pretty much, what we have always known about inequities in health and in medicine in general. So, at this stage in the game, pretty much what I'm seeing in Washington, D.C. is just the mayor, the Department of Health, schools and other organizations really pressing to get people vaccinated. And, while they do have vaccination mandates, there's still room for the religious exemption or the medical exemption, just because, at this point, from what I'm seeing, people are very, very eager about, having the vaccine being taken, but they really don't want to take it that far to just outright mandating that everybody gets it. So there's this balance between, really making sure that everybody gets it versus being cognizant and understanding of people's apprehension about it and their civil liberties.
And Sophie, communities of color have typically have had challenges and issues in getting access to good health care. What has been the conversation there in St. Louis around communities of color, and particularly the Black community, having access to good health care and now with vaccines?
Well, you're right in that there is a very prevalent and in many ways, historically speaking, reasonable distrust of the medical industrial complex in communities of color in St. Louis. Around the vaccines, I think a lot of what we've seen to be most effective is very personalized and targeted outreach. So that can look like, for example, I recently went to this back to school event that St. Louis Public Schools held, where members of the teachers union individually called those families that had been more disconnected from school that past year. So some of those students who'd kind of dropped off into the Zoom void, they reached out to those families and they said, hey, we're going to have free vaccines and we're going to have books and we're going to have free checkups. So not a vaccine, not something like as fraught as that, but also just, making sure your child is healthy. And we really want you to come to this event. There's going to be games for the kids. There's going to be like music. There's going to be a bubble machine. And this will help you get ready to get your kid back into school and back into the classroom. And so I think that type of like really human to human outreach has worked a lot better in terms of encouraging people to get vaccinated and helping answer people's questions and sort of talk people through their concerns about the vaccine itself, a lot better than, just kind of a standard issue public service announcement or something like that might work, because it feels a lot more real and a lot more trustworthy. And a lot of that's happening through the schools themselves, which I think is really important.
And Aaron, we've gone through 2 summers now of COVID-19, the initial, kind of first wave, and now the second summer. What have either students gained or lost through these 2 summers? And has summer school played a role in all that? I know you've done some reporting for us.
Summer schools in the Pacific Northwest are pretty much what they've always been. They give an opportunity for students who may have fallen off the wayside as far as their studies is concerned, the opportunity to catch up. Or they're used for the overachiever who wants to, graduate early, or things of that nature. It has become kind of important because of the pandemic, because virtual learning for Seattle in the beginning of the pandemic in 2021, Seattle struggled with getting the households prepared for virtual learning. They struggled a bit. They've since then gotten their act together, but in the beginning, it was a bit of a struggle for Seattle school districts to get their technology together, even though businesses like Amazon, Microsoft were all trying to pitch in, getting students computers, things of that nature. They struggled probably for like the first 6 months of 2020 in getting that. So the summer program of 2020 was really important for Seattle Public School District. to show that they were really getting their act together and coming together to tackle the educational issues during this pandemic. They've come along. They're doing pretty good from my perspective. They've really come together, except for, I said it in the beginning, except for the leadership. But the schools, the teachers, the students, I really tip my hat off to, because they've really adapted very well to what's going on in the Seattle public school districts. When I interview students, you know, the only thing that they really have issue with is just missing their friends, sports. Beyond that, or being, you know, the other issue that they might have is just being around their younger siblings for too long for most of the day. They don't have that, you know, they don't have that outlet like they did, you know, before the pandemic.
I think some parents would like to add their names to that list too.
I would imagine. But as far as the structure, as far as the foundation of of education and the infrastructure, as I said, in the beginning of 2020, Seattle struggled in trying to get their virtual presence within all of the homes. I do know, like, for example, the Tacoma School District really struggled with getting computers to all their students. And so the summer school program, the summer of 2020 was really, really important for our school districts as far as getting their infrastructure together. But since then, I think that they've come along and they have adapted.
Sophie?
Yeah, I'd just like to echo what Aaron said about the importance of this past year's summer school time. I know that several schools in the area actually saw record high enrollments in summer school, much of that being just because students wanted to see their friends and parents wanted to have a tiny little bit of peace of mind for once. And I do think that it really showed us the importance of getting back in the literal schoolhouse when it is possible to do so. And I know that many of those programs were also offering, in particular, special classes targeted towards addressing learning losses in math and in English. And I think that the effectiveness of those programs, we can't really tell yet. It hasn't been that long, but it'll be interesting to see how much of a difference it makes academically. And I think at this point, we can state pretty confidently that just in terms of the social happiness of the kids, it mattered a lot being able to do summer school this year.
So families really rely upon schools and education, right? In terms of sending a child to school, knowing that they're going to be in school for a certain amount of hours throughout the day, which allows parents then to go to work. And when they come home, you know, a good portion of that day has been spent, that energy's been spent, but it seems like a big burden has been shifted to parents. And I'm one of those parents who is currently effectively homeschooling a child, still going to school, but sits now in the dining room and thankfully has access to the internet to be able to do this. Can we talk about some of the families and communities that don't have access to that don't have that support system and the means to be able to provide that home support? And now where we're seeing where lots of schools are no longer even affording students remote opportunities, where students are now forced to go back to schools. And we're seeing both mask mandates and non-mask mandates and just kind of the craziness of this transition back to school now. What is that looking like for you all? Stefan?
Well, considering that kids no longer have a choice of having a remote option or not, there's a lot of pushback. And it feels like the closer the city has gotten to the beginning of the school year, the louder the cries have been for a remote option. With Mayor Bill de Blasio, you ask him, what if X, Y, and Z happens? Or what if this happens? And he's basically saying it won't happen because we've taken all of these precautions. We were successful with these precautions and measures at the end of last school year. During summer school and in summer activities, we did the same thing. We were successful with that. The COVID rates are lower in schools than they are in any other place in the city. So we're gonna do the same thing here. But you ask about the Delta variant, we're gonna do the same thing. It's gonna be okay. Everyone's gonna be vaccinated. All educational employees are gonna be vaccinated. All teachers are gonna be vaccinated. with the religious exceptions or whatever. And it feels like it's a recipe for disaster. Because there has to be some sort of option. But there was a recent poll this summer by the New York Times that said 25%, a quarter of all parents in the city want a remote option or just plan on keeping their kids at home. And things are bad when parents are like, I want to keep my kid here. I don't care about having a kid away from me for 4, 5, 6 hours. I'm concerned about their safety enough that I'm not going to send them to school. I'd rather just have them stay here. That's a big deal. And the fact that the city doesn't really acknowledge what's going on, it's kind of frustrating to me.
Alexis, it's been reported that over 1.5 million students have been lost in the pandemic, meaning that they are not currently enrolled in school. Another 1.5 million, and this is from a global study, have lost parents as a result of this. So when you take kind of those really big numbers, 1.5 million students that are currently not enrolled or not anticipated to return this fall, and another 1.5 that have lost parents as a result of COVID-19, what do you think the reentry is going to be like coming back into school this fall?
Well, simply put, some families aren't coming back. I wrote an article last year about how a lot of families are looking at homeschooling options. I wrote an article a few months back about how public schools have seen a drop in enrollment. Some of these people are finally realizing that we don't have to go the way of a public school. I see cases right here in Baltimore where people are just paying a former teacher who left the school district, and now they have a homeschool collective that they work with privately. They have 5 kids that they see and that they can control, they can space out. They don't have to worry about mask, mandate bans, any of that. They've just completely pulled out of the public school system altogether, and they're turning to homeschools. I spoke with a parent for my Word in Black article about a week ago, and she said the same thing. She was new to Baltimore City Public Schools. She moved here, and she was just appalled with the way that the first week of school rolled out. Between overcrowding in classrooms, transportation issues, nurses not being able to show up for that first week, a lot of people are really considering not coming back. And they're just, I would say going back to an older time where African Americans had to come up with their own solutions for education. They're coming back around to, hey, we can have our own teacher in the community and they can meet all of those same requirements. Because it's not, I haven't even seen, random people doing it. It's all qualified people with a master's degree, people who have been in the public school system. They know the tests, they know the standardized testing requirements, the benchmarks that everyone needs to meet. And so they're taking that education and they're linking up with the parents who are saying, now, before we had issues, but now health is the concern and we can't go back to this public school system that is more or less, like Stefan said, just putting their head in the sand and saying, hey, this is what we're going to do. We're not even going to think about the other options and it's just going to go well. That's not what you want to do here. And I think that people have seen families making that choice for themselves.
And Sam, you're seeing parents making that choice there in DC, where there is a surge of homeschooling. What have you learned?
Definitely. Over the last year, the number of children being homeschooled in DC has nearly doubled. Before March of 2020, we were looking at about 400 who submitted applications, or 400 parents who submitted applications to the state superintendent's office. And by around, I would say a couple of months ago, that number reached almost 800. And, just to piggyback off of what Alexis said, part of that was, concern around the Delta variant. But more so, it was an opportunity, from what I've been speaking to parents about, an opportunity pretty much to just step out on the limb and spend more time with their children and pretty much have a hand in, their educational path. With the homeschooling community in DC, especially among Black people, you're talking about one of the more prominent ones in the United States, where you have a whole network of mothers and fathers, mamas and babas. They're coming together and they're hiring people, and they're also using what they know inside of their mind to create the ideal school day around their children. So children aren't really relegated to the whole 8 to 3 school day, and the school day isn't taking place in a building. You know, every day you might go to a museum, you might go to a garden, you might play soccer, you might, conduct a science experiment somewhere, just somewhere out in the world where you're having hands-on experience among people who look like you, who share the same cultural, the same cultural background pretty much. And this is a movement that's been going on for many, many years now. I would say at least a decade in Washington, D.C. It's just that the pandemic has made it more popular, and it has given parents more of an opportunity to jump right into it, especially parents who never saw themselves being a part of the homeschool community. At this point, the only thing that parents are really trying to do is pretty much get access to, government funded activities that children in, the public and charter schools get. As a homeschool student, you can't play football at the high school level. You can't enter, a reading program for students who have IEPs and 501s, and that's pretty much what's happening right now. How do we, as a homeschool community, or, really get access to the same resources that taxpayers pay for? Taxpayers, regardless of whether they're homeschool educated or public school educated.
And we're seeing a lot of school districts and communities taking that funding and porting it over towards charter schools, private schools, homeschooling. So it seems like there are multiple opportunities and different plans there. But for those that are going back to regular school, and we've already seen here in the South and the Southwest that schools are effectively quarantining classes and sending kids home for 2 weeks. Stefan, is there a plan B or a plan C there in New York? And Sam, same thing in the Northeast, and Alexis, same thing in the Northeast. Is there a plan B and a plan C when kids go back to school and things go awry?
Again, they don't think things are going to go awry. They think they have everything. And the funny part about it is I contacted DOE earlier this week regarding the cry for remote learning. And basically they reiterated that they're full speed ahead on no remote option, despite the fact that Black neighborhoods have some of the lowest vaccination rates, pre-existing conditions, food deserts, and yet they're full speed on having this school year. And also, when it comes to access to technology, let's say a remote option actually happens, that we actually have one. Then there's, okay, how are we getting laptops to the kids? How are they going to remote learn? How are they going to do Zoom and all that? Where for many, many Black kids, their only means of communication through the internet is this cell phone. That's it. They don't have a laptop at home. And the parent that I mentioned like about 10 or 15 minutes ago, when I talked to her during one interview, she was in the middle of walking through IKEA looking for desks for her kids. And we discussed laptops, and depending on what you need for your Chromebook, you're paying anywhere from $200 to $800. Not everyone has that. Matter of fact, probably most people don't. So you're putting all these folks in a precarious position. And again, when I talked to DOE, they sort of pointed their finger in the other direction. Went, see, the Catholic schools don't have a remote option either. Why are you focusing on us? Because the majority of the kids in the city go to public schools. We don't care about what they're doing at this moment because we're not talking about them at this moment. We're talking about you. And it seems like there's this fight against having a remote option. I made this point the other day that what the city is doing is the equivalent of your mother's telling you to clean your room, So you start cleaning your room, then you say, forget this. You take all of the mess, you shove it under the bed. So when your mother comes in and say, look, the room is clean. When you haven't really done anything at all, you're just pushing with this one thing, and you're tricking the people into believing it's this other thing. And when it comes to September 13th, next week is when the school year starts up here. I don't know, and the city doesn't know what it's going to look like. There are certain districts, even upstate, where I have many friends upstate, where literally third day of school, their kid gets COVID and have to immediately take their kid out. With this being the biggest public school system in the country, what's that going to look like? I mean, okay, we're not Florida, but I don't think most of the country is like Florida, but we're not like Florida, and we're taking a vaccine, but that's not going to matter because you need to social distance. They're following the new CDC guidelines, which is 3 feet apart instead of 6 feet apart in the classroom. Some teachers and principals have said, we can't really do that because all of my kids aren't going to be able to fit in the classroom. And the response to that is, we'll make it work. We don't know how we're going to make it work, but we'll make it work. And that's not really a good way to approach anything.
So we'll go quickly around the horn and to wrap this up. And Sophie, I'll start with you. What's your level of confidence that the return to school plan for this fall is in a good spot there in St. Louis?
Well, I do think that there has been a lot of good planning and that there are a lot of people working very hard to make the school districts back into kind of like the community supporting infrastructure that they were always supposed to be and have always, kind of gone above and beyond to become here. However, there are also hundreds of students that are already quarantined with COVID-19. Meanwhile, the Attorney General of our state is suing school districts that mandate masks. So I think that districts and administrators and teachers are being pulled in about a million opposite and impossible directions, trying to make this school year some approximation of normal in a world in which I don't really think that a normal exists. So I do have a lot of confidence that our teachers and our administrators are doing the best that they can, but I also have confidence that they are working within an incredibly difficult set of circumstances, and that is still the case even as vaccines start to roll out, and even though we do certainly have far more tools for fighting this virus in schools and elsewhere now than we did a year ago.
And Sam, we've heard that word a lot, normal, the return to normal, or as normal as possible. How normal do you think things will be there in DC this coming fall?
Well, I'll say this, DC is really trying its best to hold on to normal, but the way that things are, it's not looking likely. And sooner than later, the DC government, specifically the mayor, the chancellor, and the leaders of the charter school system will have to concede to parents who want virtual options. This week, hundreds of students were quarantined. And at one middle school, a whole 6th grade class was quarantined as well. So, we're looking at a situation that is getting worse. And parents don't have much latitude when it comes to opting into virtual options. As of last week, 125 students applied for the virtual option, but with that, you need a medical reason. You can't just apply for the virtual option out of concern for your health or your safety. So right now, there's no latitude, but it's looking like they will have to concede at some point, or at least sweep the problem under the rug for as long as it takes.
And Aaron, the Northwest is particularly known for being a very free-spirited place, but also a place that has seen a decrease in the Black community. What are your thoughts there about a level of confidence in returning to normal this fall?
Well, as you said, Seattle kind of embraced all of the precautions necessary early. I believe that Washington State is probably like between 60 and 70% vaccinated. And so we've been kind of optimistic about reopening our communities. Virtual learning is still an option. you know, in our school districts, parents do have the option to do virtual learning, or you can go to in-class learning. The school, I noticed yesterday, school buses dropping children off. Seattle did just put in, well, King County, which is the county Seattle is in, did just put out a mask mandate, outdoor mask mandate, for large, you know, like football games, large, you know, concerts, things of that nature. So we have a mask mandate going on right now in our county. And that's outdoors, let alone indoors. Indoors, we've always had a mask mandate. So I think Seattle is feeling pretty optimistic about its school year. And we'll see what happens. When it comes to the Black community and things of that nature, unlike the South, the East Coast, you know, our Black community has been severed. It was severed years ago. We don't have that. We used to call, well, our community was called the Central District, where, you know, it was 80% African American. That's gone in Seattle, Washington. So even though if I wanted to find out whether or not my Black community, which it is to a certain extent, hesitant about the vaccine and things of that nature, protecting themselves, you got to go on an individual level and speak to individuals. I couldn't just go on a survey, you know, in the Black community and find out just how hesitancy it is, because we just don't have that community any longer. But I would say that as far as the education process, we've got football games going on right now. I had to cover the University of Washington had its first football game this past weekend. So I think the Pacific Northwest is pretty optimistic about its chances of surviving. The Delta variant is affecting, you know, just as it is the rest of the country, it is affecting us. Our cases have risen a little bit, but there's still, everything is still kind of going forward as far as education is concerned. As I said, schools are opening.
Stefan, quickly, the US Open is wrapping up this weekend, or will have wrapped up by the time we've aired this. So there'll be a mass exodus of tourists leaving New York. Do you think New York will ever get back to any sense of normalcy? And we know that's never a true statement around New York.
They're trying their best. With the exception of people wearing masks, you would think that the pandemic never happened. That's how things are operating right now. Everyone has they have their rules. Most people are abiding by the rules, but again, it feels like nothing happened. Everything has gone back to as many people as possible can come into your store if you're going to shop. There's no limit on that. At sports venues, full capacity again. I actually went to 2 Mets games right before they increased capacity. So I'm gonna miss having 2 rows to myself. But everywhere I went was outdoor venue. I went to a concert, outdoor venue. I did go to an indoor venue about 2 weeks ago, New York Liberty game, the Barclays Center. They were very strict. Basically, their rule was, if you're not eating, keep your mask on. And they did enforce that. They had the ushers walk around and tell people to put their masks on if they're not eating. That's the closest, that's the best way to go about this if you're gonna pretend that the pandemic never happened.
And Alexis, you saw this firsthand as a teacher. What do you think that teachers are hoping for returning back to school this fall? And what would you tell students?
What are teachers hoping for? I think that teachers are hoping for leaders who are not afraid to take a stand when it comes to their health. I think that teachers are looking for their hands not to be tied. Teachers want to teach. They want to be in the classroom. They want to be interactive with their students. Nobody wants to get back to normal more than the teachers who are actually interacting with our students day to day. But what they don't want is what we've seen the last 18 months, which is, you know, here's a mask, go in there, you'll be okay, even though, you know, we haven't followed all of the orders from the CDC. I think that in urban areas, we just have to stop pretending that things aren't what they are. When I first started teaching in Baltimore City in 2014, I was teaching kindergarten and I had no less than 36 students at any one time. It was between 36 and 38. Two were always coming or going. And I remember one day there was a field trip and there were some kids who couldn't go because they didn't have a permission slip. I had to go classroom to classroom looking for a classroom that had less than 40 kids to see, hey, can you take these two that don't have permission slips? Teachers don't want to be in that position. They don't want to be in overcrowded classrooms ever. They don't want to be in unsanitized conditions ever. But what they don't want to do is come back to a situation where you're saying it's going to be okay. And, you know, we're looking at it like it's not okay. There's too many students in this classroom. We can see that. Teachers don't want, they're teachers. They have master's degrees. They don't want to be patronized. And I feel like that's what's happening. Everyone in the school system had biology. We know how viruses work. I'm not really sure why we're acting like we don't know how they work now. I don't know why we're asking teachers to act like they don't know how viruses work. Like that to me is pretty much why I left, to be honest, because, you know, I understand viruses, even outside of my work as a journalist, without being on the phone with the CDC and the White House. Everyone knows how viruses work. You have to cover your face so that droplets don't aren't expelled out of your mouth and your nose. Why are we having these arguments? So what do teachers want? I think teachers want the truth. They want people to recognize the truth. They want people to recognize the situation that we're in. It is not a situation anyone wants to be in. Nobody wants to be in a pandemic. Nobody wants these masks on their face. We don't want to social distance. But at the end of the day, we cannot keep putting our head in the sand, ignoring basic facts about science. And I think that our teachers in urban areas are really, I mean, they need someone to advocate for them. They need someone, a principal, to stand up and say, hey, my school can't social distance because we have 38 kids in every classroom. So you know what, like we're gonna have to take a stand somewhere because we don't want to bury teachers. We don't want to bury the parents or the grandparents that are taking care of these kids when they leave from school. So I hope that's not too much of a tangent, but I mean, I think overall, short answer, teachers are looking for an opportunity to teach in a safe environment. They don't want to be patronized. They want the CDC's guidelines to be followed. And if they cannot be followed to the T, then they don't want to put their life at risk. That's what they're asking. They want to teach, but they don't want to put their life at risk.
Well, thank you, Alexis. I think the words that you just spoke are so true. And I'm sure there are plenty of teachers out there who would agree with what you've had to say. So with that, I want to thank all of our reporters who've joined us today. Alexis, thank you. Sophie, Aaron, Stefan, and Sam. And with that, I will toss it back to Sonny. Sonny, take it away.
This has been a thought-provoking discussion. And Andrew, I want to thank each of our guest reporters, Alexis Taylor from the Afro, Sophie Hurwitz from the St. Louis American, Aaron Allen from the Seattle Media, Stefan Johnson from the New York Amsterdam News, and Sammy P.K. Collins from Washington Informe for sharing your work and the community experiences with us. I also want to compliment my co-host, Andrew Ramsamy, for working on making this program more informative. We invite you to join the Word in Black family and sign in by going to wordinblack.com and signing up for our newsletters. And also support Word in Black by simply becoming a founding member and pushing the donate button on the wordinblack.com website. Your investment helps us do more of this work. All of the individuals who have participated in this roundtable, from the reporters to the host, and especially our partners at Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, who, because of their funding, made this program possible. We're all dedicated to fostering solutions to racial inequities, and we are laser focused on K-12 education because we believe it begins there. From the members and staff of Word in Black, I want to say thank you to each one of you for joining us for the program, and encourage you to become a part of the Word in Black family by simply visiting our website at wordinblack.com. It's a good investment of your time, your money, and your resources. Thank you again. This concludes the Word in Black Reporters Roundtable. on education.